Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. I'm Justin. I'll be your host tonight. And with me today is Cody. It's just the two of us.
Hey,
Say hello to
hey.
the nice people.
Hi, everybody.
We're here to talk about, well, it's a classic or crap episode, which I don't think we've actually done in a while. But before we really jump into the topic of the day, let's find out what's been going on. Cody, what's new with you?
Oh my. Well, what an unexpected question. A little bit here and there, but I'm actually gonna spend my time today on the intro just saying that I'm excited, counting down to this Wednesday and Sunday coming up here, both involving pro wrestling. Sunday, I'll be in North Carolina for the first time in my life to go see my favorite wrestler of all time, Sting's last match, which is
Hmm.
going to be Sunday night at the AEW Revolution pay-per-view. So it's a tag match. Um, we'll see if he wins his last match or not. He's actually undefeated since he's came back, which I didn't realize. I guess I
Oh,
should have realized, but he's 22-0 over the last 3 years. Doesn't wrestle that often, so it comes out to about 7 matches a year, but kind of fun when he does. And this is the last go round, so I'm preparing myself to weep many tears along with 16,000 people I don't know and my son. So looking forward to that. And then this Wednesday before it, coming up here 2 days after this drops, will be his last TV appearance as an active professional wrestler, which is also going to be kind of an emotional night for me, I'm sure. Unfortunately, my daughter has a concert at the same time, so
oh, priorities.
I'm gonna have to decide how to play that out. I might have to watch a replay or something because I don't think I can miss her thing for his thing. So,
Hmm.
but that's what I'm excited for. It's been a long time running. There's a chance I may drop a little tribute episode this week. I don't know if I will or not, but what did I figure? I figured 36 years I've been watching him wrestle. So long time. I did have the very lucky opportunity to meet him about 5, 6 years ago for a little quick autograph handshake. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's my big thing coming up here for me. How about you, Justin?
Nice. I have a question first. Is
Yeah.
Ric Flair still wrestling? Because I believe this is Sting's last match, but I have a feeling Ric Flair is just going to be in the ring until he drops dead.
So Ric Flair had his quote unquote last match, like I forget, 2 years ago maybe.
Okay.
And he is actually in AEW right now and has been for the last 3 months for Sting's last match. He's kind of appeared on TV to say he wanted to be there to
Oh,
see his friend off. Um, and
okay.
storyline wise, this past Wednesday, he complained to an interviewer backstage that he hasn't been featured as much as he thinks he should have been, which I wasn't sure if it actually was the script or if he was just doing Ric Flair shit, but
It's impossible to tell.
it is impossible to tell. But then he ended up going in the dressing room with the tag team there fighting in the last match. So I don't know what's going to happen here. It could be a screw job or it could be a double screw job. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
Nothing would
Okay.
surprise me with that guy.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, on my side of things, well, I dodged bullets for 4 years, and
He's a
last
dad.
week, no, no,
Oh.
no. Arguably not as bad of an outcome. Uh, I finally caught COVID last week, and yeah. So on that note, apologies if I am a little scattered today. Most of the brain fog has kind of cleared up, but yeah, I might miss a cue here or there or something. It's just it wasn't horrible, but uh I just had absolutely no energy. Just fatigued at doing the smallest things, couldn't concentrate on anything. It was just it wasn't great. But I mean, I can only think of how much worse it would have been if I hadn't been more or less up to date on my boosters and stuff.
Yeah, right.
So but avoid it if you can. If you somehow, dear listeners, if you haven't caught it yet, still take precautions. It's not fun. Um, so
No
that really
bueno.
kind of took the wind out of my sails for the past week or two. So
Yeah.
I've I've been plugging away at what we're going to. Is it next week we're doing the
Good
other
question.
game? Okay, well, I've been working my way through another game that we're going to be talking about in the near future, which thankfully I've been able to do without having to focus too much on things like storyline or what have you. But I'm not going to name it because it'll be a surprise. Um, and which I think is also another classic or crap episode, come to think of it. Anyway,
Yeah.
but we'll save that for another time. I've just been recuperating. That's been kind of my thing. Today I mentioned it's a classic or crap, and we're going to be talking about a little game that seems to have divided us a bit, but we'll see. Game called Alan Wake. The sequel came out a few months ago, I think back in September of 2023, to overall positive reception. So we're a little late, in covering the original here, but since it was on sale on a few major platforms recently, we figured why not? Let's go back, take a look, see if the source material holds up. Um, so what is Alan Wake? It's generally considered a horror game. It's arguable how much you really want to put it in with the likes of, say, Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Fatal Frame, in terms of actual scariness, but I think it generally falls into that category. Um, Centers around the eponymous main character, Alan Wake, who is a successful and yet down on his luck writer who finds himself essentially in what is the video game version of a Stephen King story. We'll get to
Yeah.
the specifics in a bit. And it is a third person, so it's not like the new Resident Evils where it's first person and you're seeing everything through his eyes, but very classical gameplay, except no tank controls. You can actually like move in any direction, which is nice. Your main tools are flashlights and guns. A standard survival horror fare, especially considering most of the guns are the quote unquote holy trinity of pistol, shotgun, and rifle. A few others, but there are some interesting mechanics at play. But I guess before we dive too much into it, how did you first hear about Alan Wake, Cody? Was it due to this whole idea of covering it, or had it been on your radar before?
Yeah, I had heard of it before, but this having never been on a Nintendo system before prior to the Switch, was definitely not something I had played. It wasn't something I had like played with you or Dave or anybody like that. 'Cause sometimes I do pick up a random horror game here or there with you guys through the years, but it was an interesting one just because I knew it was kind of some kind of survivor slash psychological horror, I guess maybe we could throw on there as well. And like you said, I think it was on a sale on the eShop, and I had questioned a couple of you, and you all had said like, yeah, give it a shot. So I picked it up on sale, and regardless of what my score is today, don't regret that I picked it up on sale and gave it a playthrough because I do think it's a very unique experience. Um, I It's called Alan Wake, and I was like really curious, like, is that the guy's name? Because there's like no comma in there. Are they like commanding Alan to wake? But they do use that joke several times in the game, so I guess it's a well-named character for the punchline alone. But yeah, it's just something that I had never had a chance to play, but had heard of, so definitely wanted to give it a shot.
Gotcha.
How about you?
Uh, well, I remember like when this first came out on the Xbox 360, and I didn't have a 360. I was a PlayStation gamer at the time.
Hmm.
But I remembered it looked really interesting and different, and it was just one of those things where it's like, well, it's a console exclusive. I guess I'll never play it. Fast forward to a few years ago where I got a gaming PC and I happened to be poking around on Steam, and I'm like, I wonder. So I go through and it's sure enough, it's there on Steam, and I'm like, it was like $15 or something, and I thought, why not? I've been curious about this all these years. I'll give it a go. I bought it like a week before they announced the remastered edition. so,
Oh,
so there was that. Uh, so I played like the OG, original textures, kind of. I don't know what was really touched up in the remaster, but I played like the core version of the game,
okay.
higher resolution, I'm sure, than the 360 would have had, but that's it. Everything else was as presented, and I think it still looks fairly good. I mean, good use of lighting, interesting character designs and things. I've certainly seen worse looking games from that era.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this one had been on my radar for years and years before I finally got a chance to play it. Um, so should we go? Eventually, we do have to kind of go through the story, give spoilers. Do we want to do that right, like right out of the gate at this point,
Yeah, I'd say
or
let's just do the story first, and then we talk
sure?
about maybe, things we enjoyed or that didn't work for us.
Sure. Okay. So the story follows Alan Wake and his wife, Alice. Alan is a very successful writer of like thrillers, hard-boiled, detective novels, except he's run into a really bad case of writer's block. And to try and help break him out of it, or at least get his mind off it, his wife suggests a vacation, a getaway to this little town in Washington called Bright Falls, away from everything, fresh air, pine trees, nature, just get away from, the stresses of city life and publishing and all that. Um, and the intro where you're approaching, Bright Falls is really neat because it harkens back to kind of the tram ride in Half-Life, where you're seeing a bunch of stuff as you're just approaching, and the story is playing out as you're getting introduced to the game. Um, but you get there, and it's almost kind of a Twin Peaksy sort of town, I would say.
Yeah, it's a
The
great comparison.
Yeah, the inhabitants are all a little quirky at best, utterly bizarre at worst. Some are almost direct parallels of Twin Peaks characters, like the lady who's carrying around the lantern is more or less the log lady
Log
from
lady, yeah.
yeah, from Twin Peaks. But so you go, you try to meet up with the person who's got the keys to your cabin, where you're going to be staying, and they're nowhere to be found. Uh, Events happen, and you end up with the keys, and you head back into the car, drive off, and the guy you were looking for suddenly appears from the diner where you were looking for him, holding the set of keys and shouting for you to come back. So things are already starting to go a little askew. Um, but it's an interesting setup. So you get to the cabin, you go through a few like not quite fetch quests, but things to turn on the lights because your wife has nyctophobia. She's afraid of the dark.
Yeah.
And light and darkness play a really big role in this game and its sequel. So you go get the generator started, and you get into a fight with her when you get back inside because she's brought your typewriter along with her, and she's like, I thought maybe a change of scenery would get the creative juices flowing or whatever. And he storms off. She screams after he's a little ways away from the cabin, goes back in, and kind of all hell breaks loose. I can't remember at this point in the story. Do you see her fall into the lake,
I
or
don't
do you
think you
discover that
see her, but I think you hear like a
the
scream and a
splash?
splash, maybe.
Okay, so yeah, the cabin I should mention is on a little island in a pretty sizable lake. Um, you rush down there, you see that she's drowning, dive in, try to save her, and you can't. You can't find her. She's somewhere in there, and when you emerge, you're somewhere else. I think that's how that goes. It's been a few years since I played this, but then the story shifts into full on Stephen King territory. Like there's people that are from the town, but they're changed. They're all like shadowy, and they're speaking nonsense, but they want you dead for some reason. Elements from things Alan has written start showing up as he's trying to find his way through this weird netherworld that he's kind of emerged into. There's a voice in the sky that's shining, coming from a shining light. It's weird, and it works. Um, but you fight your way through all this, and I suppose I should talk about the whole light darkness mechanics, because pretty much every enemy in this game is shrouded in like a shield of shadows.
Yeah.
And in most survival horror games, you need the flashlight to see where you're going. You turn it off to sneak past enemies, that sort of thing. Here, they actually use it in a really interesting way because you need to burn away this shadowy barrier between you and them before you can actually hurt them. And it is a game where you can fight back. I do appreciate that. I've never been a huge fan of horror games where all you can do is run and hide.
Well, Florida. Sorry,
Yes.
Florida.
I mean, no one there is listening to us anymore anyway. The governor's put out radio silence.
We love
Um,
you.
um,
Kind
so
of.
yeah, so it's a really neat mechanic because your flashlight obviously uses batteries, your guns use bullets, and it becomes kind of a juggling act to know like when to back off, when to recharge, when to reload, when to run. And it's a neat mechanic. But so you fight your way to back to civilization, more or less, and call the cops because your wife's missing, people are trying to kill you, the world has gone mad. And you actually get through, which surprised me when I played that. And the cops show up, they're trying to talk you down, because you're waving a gun around, you're talking about like my wife
Yeah.
disappeared, and yeah. So eventually the sheriff takes you back to where you had been staying, and there's no cabin. It's just an empty,
No island.
yeah, no island, no cabin. It's just a drop and empty space and with water in the bottom. And it's just, that's the end of chapter 1. And that I was hooked from that point onward, just because that was such an effective setup, I thought. Um, how did you feel like that first act played out?
I think I'm trying to differentiate them in my head, but I think the first act I liked the premise of kind of what you're saying here. Like it was pretty evident early in this game that they were going to go for a lot of you as the player, the viewer don't really know what's real and what's not in this game, which I think has been done in movies somewhat, but I don't know if it's a frequent thing you see in games where like just in this, like he could, like you said, he could open the door and pop up anywhere, or like he comes out of the water and it's someplace else or whatever the case is. I don't know that that has been done too often in games. So I was intrigued at this point in the game.
Okay. Um, so yeah, the rest of the game from this point onward, I think we don't need to like do a scene by scene kind of breakdown, I don't think, but it's Alan trying to figure out what the hell is going on. He finds out that his wife might not be dead after all, so he's trying to get her back, and also trying to figure out whether all of this is just in his head or if somehow things he's written are bleeding over into reality. And it encompasses a very colorful cast of characters. And I really do love the supporting cast in this. Your background right now is Alan's agent, Barry Wheeler, who is actually one of my favorite characters in the game, just because he's this sort of smarmy, smart aleck, agent from New York who's, he's trying to get you to break through your slump too. He finds out you're in trouble, so he actually travels across country to see what he can do to help you out. And he's comic relief, but he's actually useful at times, and he's more competent than his initial flustered, demeanor would have you believe.
Yeah, I did enjoy that
There's
they had a comic character that didn't detract from like the horror element of the game somehow. Like it managed to fit in there well as like levity and a little bit of, I don't know.
Yeah, like at one point he's wrapped himself in Christmas lights once he realizes
Yeah.
that this shit's actually happening. He's like, "It's to keep the darkness away, Al." Just so yeah, just pretty good writing on a lot of these
Tell me
these
Hudson
folks.
couldn't play this character. Come on, this would be great.
I would pay good money to see that. um,
We will make a Halloween theme just to match whatever we can do to get Hudson to be this character.
I am
I wonder if he's
totally on
played this
board.
though. He probably hasn't played it, hey? I bet he hasn't played
He
it.
should. I think he'd enjoy this one in all
Yeah.
honesty. Um, but yeah, so there's him. There's the two old rocker guys who
Yes.
they seem like they're just background characters when you first see them in the diner. They're just kind of bantering to each other, and one tells you to play something on the jukebox. But they keep showing up, and they are so fun. Their names are Tor and Odin. Their band is called the Old Gods of Asgard, and they something surrounding them is one of my favorite scenes in this game and one of my favorite sequences in gaming in a very long time, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, they were a lot
um
of fun.
yeah. There's the skeezy psychiatrist who also your wife kind of had ulterior motives of getting you to sit down and talk to try and break through your block. um there's Rose at the diner, who is like Alan Wake's biggest fan, and it's a whole cast of quirky, fun characters, and yeah, it's amazing how well all of them work. I think there's none that feel just like when one popped up, I was like, oh, not them again. But I think they all kind of fit in and contributed something to the story, which is a pretty impressive feat for, especially for a horror game, where usually you get side characters and they're just there to be cannon fodder or to be saved or something.
Yeah, I enjoyed all
Um,
the characters in this game. I actually would have preferred a little more of them.
mm,
Or just more characters that you bumped into as you were going around doing your stuff. Like the scenes with other characters where you interact with them are really well done. But if it's just you like playing the game, like it felt like the world was really empty at that point.
that's fair. And isolation is usually a core element to horror games, so I guess it kind of makes sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, seeing that interaction between everybody in the town and Alan himself and whatnot, I do feel like those were some of the stronger moments. Um, so let's see, where do we leave off? Oh, end of chapter one. So yeah, from that point, it's Alan's going through the town trying to find out what happened to his wife. Someone claims to have kidnapped her at one point, so he has to kind of meet this guy's demands. But it turns out he's actually working on behalf of somebody else to try and. It's a multi-layered story, um, and it does it ultimately boil down to uh, something in the lake attracts artists and uses their creativity to try and drag itself out into the real world. So you find out eventually, like Tor and Odin, the old rockers, they were almost its victims at one point. This poet slash filmmaker named Tom Zane, who had also been in the area, years and years ago, he was almost a victim at one point, and it just keeps drawing these people in from outside to try and emerge into our world.
Mm.
And it's not quite as Lovecraftian as it might sound. Like I said, this feels much more like a Stephen King kind of story. But what did you think of that overall theme once it was fully revealed that that's what was going on?
Yeah,
Did it
well,
work for you?
this actually raises, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but I did put it as like a question mark on this game, which is by I think whatever happens in like section two, I think section two might be when you wake up in the hospital, if I recall.
It was
Not
two or
positive
three.
on that. Yeah. But the game very quickly, because it was so like questioning whether anything was real or not, it almost started to have like me as the player, I started to invest myself a little bit less in the different things that were happening because I just assumed none of it was real. Because I
Mhm.
assumed like this is all in his mind or because this is all from this force. Like when we woke up in the hospital, I was like, well, this is not real. Like they're trying to
Mm.
do another angle here where it looks like he's crazy and this is all in his head, or there's other parts where they're like he's dreaming all this, or like they do these little things to try to make you question whether or not it's all happening. But I think because it went off the rails so quickly to begin with, I was like, well, this is probably all just in his mind. Like the entire thing is all in his mind. So I just assumed a lot of this wasn't real.
Mm.
Thomas Zane, I assumed was Alan Wake, like a different ego that he had made for himself that he's basically talking to at some points. That doesn't really seem to be the case,
Mm.
but because it's so nebulous, there is also a chance of like, well, what is actually real here? What is actually the solution? Which I did like, but also I think some of the reveals or twists that they put into it, I think had a little less effect on me because I was like, I don't trust any of this stuff. So
And that is fair. Because I mean, if it is all real and people are getting taken over by the darkness and whatnot, that means he's murdered a lot of people, including like the psychiatrist, the big name pop culture psychiatrist who he ends up being looked after by at one point, because he's again, this we were at full in spoiler territory. He's a boss at one point, and yeah, you fill him full of lead, and presumably if this is all happening, that means that guy's dead, like dead as a doornail. um so it does raise a lot of questions. I I liked how they incorporated the views of other characters, like Barry. He eventually, he follows you around for a couple sections, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Holy crap! I thought you were losing it, but no, I've seen this crap with my own eyes." So that led me to believe that okay, somehow this is all a supernatural thing that's going on, and I will say the second game delves more into that. I definitely
Okay.
don't want to spoil two games here, um, but yeah, it's I liked the approach, especially after chapter one. Like I said, it was just kind of like just very well put together. It felt like an episode of a TV show, and it's like, oh, what's the next episode going to show us? Where's it gonna go from here?
I absolutely think this would make a fantastic TV show.
Yeah,
Um,
and
it'd probably
oh,
make
go
a
on.
good movie as well, but to really do it justice, I'm pitching like a maybe 6 or 7 episode TV show would be fantastic
Mhm.
for this.
Yeah, and we should say that it does incorporate some live action footage in certain parts. There's as you're playing, you'll stumble across these episodes of a show like a Twilight Zone kind of show called Night Springs,
Yes,
and all real people, acting the stuff out, and it's
I
cheesy,
liked
but
those.
me too. Um, yeah, and nice little vignettes, a little break from all the action, and yeah, they were fun. Um, but yeah, I liked the sort of juxtaposition of the character models and then occasional real life footage, and because it also sort of blended the boundaries between what's real, what's fake. So
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting artistic choice, and much more of that in the second game. I'll say that.
Okay.
But so yeah, eventually you find out, like I said, there's this other force at work. It appears to have embodied itself as, oh God, what was her? Barbara Jagger,
Yeah,
I
I think
think
so.
was, yeah, who it was at one point in love with this Thomas Sane character, but there's, like I said, there's layers to this. It's a little convoluted, but she also got absorbed by the darkness, and she's acting as its face more or less to try and draw enough people in to finally get it to emerge into the world. Is more or less what the story comes down to. But there's, again, that kind of touches on this whole small town quirkiness, where in the midst of cosmic entities trying to destroy reality, you've got this small town love triangle between this poet, this woman who was in love with him, the diner lady who's in love with Ellen, that kind of thing, and it all kind of has an effect on the story too. It's a little bizarre, especially when you factor in the light lady, the lamp lady, Cynthia Weaver, I think was her name.
Weaver for sure. I can't remember her first
Yeah,
name, but yeah, I kind of wish
yeah.
that you mentioned that. I kind of wish, and I don't know if the second game does this, that there had been some element of like choices you made during the game that would have affected the ending a little bit.
I
Or even like, what choices you made like changed what the reality of the actual story was. That would have been cool.
I agree with you. There is kind of an element of that in the second game, but it's more like used to solve puzzles than to
Okay.
affect where the story goes. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like if depending on how Alan reacted to, say, Miss Weaver, yeah, versus if she might be more or less willing to help him, he might have to go a harder route if he pisses her off, that kind of thing.
Or
I
even
do think, yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I do think that would have added an interesting layer to it, because you would have had to account for the human element too.
Yeah. It would have taken a lot more work, but it would have been cool if like the game had ended with like with you either like waking up as a patient in the sanitarium or
Mhm.
as somebody at the typewriter or as your wife's alive, or I mean that could have been really interesting.
Oh, sure. And other horror games have done that. Like the Silent Hill series has a long history of multiple endings depending on what you do during the course of the game. So it's not without precedent.
Yeah.
And I do think that would have been really interesting. Um, so yeah, you eventually end up with a final showdown against the embodiment of the darkness in the lake, which we can talk about in terms of how we felt about that in a second. I'm just trying to get to the last of the story. And when you eventually defeat it, Alan realizes that he can rewrite the story, but there needs to be a balance. in order to save his wife, he has to offer up something else in return. Otherwise, the story doesn't work. So basically, the core game ends with him swapping places with his wife. She emerges from the lake. He's trapped there seemingly forever, and really dark in terms of that, but an interesting way to end it, especially the final line. If you remember that, it's
I
not a
don't
lake,
recall it.
it's an ocean.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when I heard that, when I first finished it, a while back, it's like, okay, I'm on board for whatever comes next. Turns out there were some DLCs I didn't know about, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Um, but so anything in that whole thing that you wanted to comment on, like the fight against the final boss, or like anything leading up to it, and we
I
can
mean,
just
I have
kind
a
of
lot of pros and cons and some other things for the game. I don't know if you want me to put those in here or later, though.
well, how about we just since we did gloss over a lot of the meat of the story, any particular scenes that really stood out to you, or sequences that you really enjoyed, or hated, for that matter?
I'm if I'm picking up what you're putting down here, I'm thinking one of the scenes I really enjoyed, probably my favorite in the first the main part of the game, the original content, not the DLC, was the
Mhm.
concert scene, which I'm guessing maybe was what you were hinting at earlier. So
Oh
you
yes,
are essentially on the farm of the two gentlemen who are the old gods of Asgard, and they have like a whole concert stage and fireworks show set up on their property. And this is where you have one hell of a battle against the Taken as they're coming at you. And Barry's like playing DJ and like shooting off fireworks and blasting music at them. And there's all these
there's an animatronic
contraptions.
dragon that actually breathes fire.
There's some
It's
pretty cool shit, I gotta say. That was a really fun scene. Really long battle. It was really fun though. Like it didn't, overstay its hand. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot of pickups you could do for like ammo and things, but you had to kind of balance like people rushing the stage when you were
yes,
going to pick those up. But it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
yeah.
I didn't realize till like my second or third try that the spotlight in the front of the stage also served as one of the save checkpoints, which I don't think we mentioned either. But
Oh, I didn't actually never realize that was
so I
one.
think I think there was a way to save like mid battle, but essentially all the like
Uh,
street lights, spotlights type things are like every time you'd walk through one in the game, that would be the saved checkpoint then
yes,
that you could continue on at.
yeah, and they'd heal you a little bit too, which was also
Oh yeah.
nice. But yeah, that whole sequence was just fantastic. I mean, you didn't even really mention the song blaring in the background as
Oh yeah.
the stage is being rushed, and you're fending off the ones that get through with like road flares and a shotgun. I mean, it's just
It's pretty awesome.
one of the most metal things I've ever experienced in gaming. So yeah, definite highlight for me, as well. I mentioned the way chapter one ended with that big reveal that there was no cabin at all, and just all the questions that raised. That was a huge high point. Um, let's see, what did you think about the room that Miss Weaver had set up with all the light bulbs and everything, her safe place,
The
the
room,
bright place?
the well-lit
Yeah,
room or whatever it's called, the
yeah, yeah.
bright lit room. I have a lot of interesting questions about her. She's a really interesting character. I thought it was a cool looking room. I was convinced like all of the signs that kept saying like whatever it says, well lit room or bright lit room this way, and then like you keep following those. I was like, this is gonna be a trap. There's no way this is gonna be what it actually is. And it turned out it was, but um so I'm assuming then is that implying that she is the one who went around the world and drew everything in the paint?
I think so, because it's paint that only reacts to bright light. It's luminescent paint. And yeah, she is, to tell you a little bit more about her character. She doesn't just carry a lantern around. She like wanders the town and making sure that lights aren't burning out. She'll like when you first see her in the diner, she's like, "Oh, you don't want to go back there. That it's dangerous things are in the dark, and that light's not long for this world," kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And she is obsessed with making sure that the darkness stays away, because she had some sort of connection to Thomas Zane, who was maybe the first person to get drawn in by the presence in the lake. It's not 100% clear, but
Well, this is where the
um,
story gets kind of interesting to try to figure out because I once I saw that like the signs all led to her and it was a real thing. Then I assumed she must be the one who went around this whole world like painting stuff and not only painting stuff but like leaving chests in random places with extra batteries and flares and guns that she apparently has a huge supply of from someplace. But then I'm thinking like
Hmm.
when did she do that? Did she do that after Zane was taken? But also this doesn't seem to be a constant thing in this town because the villagers you talk to are like unaware of a lot of this. They're like, Zane, oh, I think I heard of that name once upon a time, blah, blah, blah. So did she just spend like 20 years like running around putting chests in the woods and stuff for in case it happened again? Like it's kind of interesting to
I
think about it that way.
I think that's what's implied. It's like she never wanted to be stuck anywhere that she didn't have more light and more ways to defend herself.
Hmm.
I mean, she's that obsessed, I think is what the message was. So, but I liked the setup of that room because you open it and it's like it's just
Willy Wonka factory.
yeah, strings of lights everywhere on the ceilings, on the walls. It's just, like those old pictures you see of like Thomas Edison lighting up Times Square or whatever. It felt kind of like that. So, some really interesting set pieces in this. I will say one sequence I wasn't really fond of is that final fight I mentioned, because when you're fighting, I guess the embodiment of the thing in the lake, the embodiment of Barbara Yager, um, it's this giant tornado of darkness, and you see it a couple of times. Before you actually confront it, it's like
Hmm.
tearing up roads and bridges and things that you're trying to get across. But when you finally confront it, it's just there's these isolated platforms you're trying to get across, and then this endless supply of flare gun flares, and you just like you just keep reloading and firing into the center until you hit the things you need to hit, and then the fight is over. I thought that was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, there were a few quote unquote boss battles, I would say, that like did not leave me satisfied, I will say. Um,
Hmm.
that being one, I know this kind of bleeds over into the DLC a little bit too, but a lot of stuff where they had like television screens as like
Hmm.
enemies, I was like, I don't know about this. Like, this is kind of weird.
Yeah. I will say the studio Remedy has always had a little bit of a problem with enemy variety. Like they made Max Payne, and of course you're going to be just fighting regular dudes with guns there. That's fine. But they made this. They made Control, which, despite the premise of that, most of what you're fighting are just kind of like the Taken in a way. They're glowy guys that are possessed, and there's not a whole lot of variety to them.
Yeah.
At least in this, there's some extra stuff. Like, is it ridiculous to be fighting a bulldozer at one point? Yes, but at the same time, at least it was something different. And there are inanimate objects in this that can get possessed and come alive and try to kill you. Uh, but that's really it. Otherwise, it's just shadowy guy, bigger shadowy guy, fast
Yes.
shadowy guy, and yeah, I despite how much I like the story, I do feel the combat in terms of what you were fighting suffered a lot. And it seems like we are in agreement on that one.
Yeah, I put that note in mine as well. The enemy variety in this just could have been a little more. Basically, you had the Taken, the guys, the birds, and things that got possessed. That encompasses all of the bad guys.
Yep. Yeah. I
Um,
forgot about the birds, but yeah.
yeah, which then I just kind of put down too in my it was like that was a little bit of a negative to me then because I said there's really not much else to be scared of because it's only one of those three things that are going to come after me.
Yeah. Like there was a sequence. I'm not sure if you noticed this. One of the times you're in the woods, there's a sign that you pass at one point that says like "danger, bears in area." And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh shit, there's going to be a taken bear, and that's going to be a completely different kind of experience. It's probably going to be the boss. They never use it, and
Hmm.
it's just like if the sign was there, it would have been the perfect setup, and just it fizzled. It never went anywhere, and that was very disappointing to me.
Well, the enemies actually were another reason why I kind of question like what's actually happening here because all of the Taken that you fight are guys. So, and I know it's like a
Hmm.
mining slash lumbering town. So yes, there'd be more men than women, presumably, but it's like only those that are the enemies that are there, which, you take it a step further and be like, they all have a weapon of some sort, a sickle or a axe that they're throwing or
a
a
wrench or
chainsaw or
something.
something,
Yeah.
but like, and you see them like jump over things and climb down off of things. Like clearly they can interact with the environment. So it's also
Mhm.
interesting that like they didn't run over to that crate of all of the weapons and like pick something up to come attack me with. Like it's kind of, I have a lot of comments on the combat, but I don't know if you want me to get into that quite yet. So.
Um, we can get there. I have a feeling that's going to be a lengthier section. So, I guess any other elements that you wanted to touch on in terms of like set pieces, or
Well,
if not, we can just
I
jump
don't know
in.
if it's a set, just to continue on about the enemy variety in this game, though. I
Yeah.
just want to make a comment too of like this game used like a certain soundtrack and like the wind effect for when enemies were getting closer and then they eventually were going to attack you. And I kind of wish they hadn't done that because it
Mhm.
like as a player, A always tipped me off that there was a combat coming up, right? And
Mhm.
then like B, like it also immediately made me like not afraid of any other noise I heard in the game. Because I was like, oh, it's not the
Ah,
wind, so it's not bad, guys.
gotcha.
I'm okay.
Yeah, yeah, that is a fair point. It's not as bad as like in Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which is a game I do like, but in that game you're never in any danger if the world isn't frozen. I
Mm,
mean, so it's
yeah.
not quite that egregious, but I do see where you're coming from, and
That,
that's
yep.
fair. Um, but I mean, at the same time, I do like that for things like the birds that could come at you from any angle. I do like how it often would kind of slow things down and pivot to like where they're coming from, so
Hmm.
that you had an idea or at least a chance to defend yourself before it's just like, oh no, they're all over me kind of a thing. Um, but um, let's dive into the combat because I figure we can talk about our beef or accolades for the original game, then move on to like the two little DLCs that came with.
Sounds
So
good.
go ahead.
It's terrible. Combat's terrible in this game. Here's my
I Okay, go
Here's my
ahead. I'll let you.
section on combat. Couple parts to this. So Justin's already kind of highlighted each battle's going to be basically the same. You got a flashlight, you're going to have to shine or use other items, interactive environment things like spotlights or flares or other things of that nature to basically make the shroud of darkness disappear from your enemies. And then you have to attack them with whatever you have. So that's kind of the premise here. My issue in this game, and I mentioned it in our chat quite a few times, there's a couple parts to this. Number one, a lot of this game takes place out in the woods, which, as much as I'm going to complain about this for the next 2 minutes, I enjoyed that because I don't feel like enough games take place in the woods. I think it's very hard to do justice to have combat in an open environment that's like that. Kind of foggy, kind of nighttime here, so it's really hard to see and everything. So I commend them for trying that. The issue is because you're in a fully 360 environment, a lot of times they spawn enemies behind you, which I severely disliked. It's realistic, I get that, because not every enemy you'd face would magically show up in front of you. But if they show up behind you and you don't see that in time, most enemies in this game have some sort of melee weapon, which they swing. But no enemy in this game swings the melee weapon one time. It's always like a swing and swing back or a swing, swing back, swing. And so what happens is you not only get a cheap hit on you, you're guaranteed to get a cheap 2 to 3 hits on you, but you can only be hit 5 times before you're dead, or 4 times, and the fifth time you're essentially dead. So if you have one that hits you and then another one rushes in, this game also, I will say realistically, but bothered me when you get hit in this game, there's an animation of Alan Wake like going like "Ooh, ooh," or like bending over, like reacting from the hit that
Mhm.
struck him. And because he's doing that, you can't do anything back in the meantime, which I get in real life. That's how that would work. That is not how 95% of video games would work, however, where I could be like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Let me light a flare to like get a little breathing distance off this. I'm already hit and doing the animation, and therefore I'm going to get hit twice more by the next melee weapon that strikes, and then I'm dead. And it doesn't really give you a ton of options to survive when that happens, but you have a counterpoint. Go ahead.
Okay, so usually when enemies appear, even if they're behind you, like I said, the camera does that thing where it sort of pans back or shifts to the side or whatever, shows you where they're coming from. and that's to give you a chance to like reorient yourself and stun them with the flashlight for a bit so you can then get some distance, because there is a dodge button, there is a run button. So you stun them for a second so they kind of like cover their eyes and stumble a bit, get back a ways, then either pull out a flare and throw it, or shine the flashlight on one that's closer to you or whatever. It's all about managing where they're coming from. And usually I felt like the panning out of the camera did give you enough time to at least have a chance to avoid the worst of it. Um, Maybe it was because I played it on PC and I had the keyboard and mouse controls. I was able to like turn quicker and dodge quicker that way. Maybe, but at times it felt difficult. There were a few cheap hits here and there, but overall I didn't feel like it was nearly as bad as you're making it sound.
It's interesting you just said that, because I was just reflecting on the DLC, which we're going to talk about in a second, because
Mhm.
you mentioned, I think, twice in there that when they spawn behind you, they do that pivot camera thing.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they did that in the first game.
Really?
In the DLCs, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
I can picture like a chance to dodge that. I don't think they did that in the first one.
Oh,
So
maybe that was something they changed in the remastered edition.
maybe
Like I said, I
it's
played the original, so I don't know.
that's interesting you said that now, because I don't think it ever did that. When there was somebody that spawned
Oh,
behind me, like they hit me before I knew there was somebody there.
oh,
I
okay.
didn't.
So yeah,
It wasn't that I was not dodging. It's that I didn't know anybody was behind me, and then boom, boom, I'm half dead.
oh damn. Okay, so yeah, your stance on this makes a lot more sense. But yeah, throughout
Hmm.
the first game, I remembered that was a thing. So
I
I'm
gotta
not
try to
sure
look that up.
why.
That's
Yeah,
weird.
yeah. At least
Um,
I'm pretty sure I remember that being the case more often than not, at least. Maybe not for every single encounter, but I do remember having a chance to react.
yeah, there was a lot of non-fair cornholing going on here, where they just put me in the corner and had their way until I was done. So, and let's talk about that run button. Why the hell are these shadow creatures faster than me? Why is a
So
guy who's 300 pounds carrying a chainsaw faster than a 180-pound author who can run through the woods? What?
because he's possessed by the darkness, and that gives him supernatural strength and stamina.
My God.
It's the same reason why he can take bullets until you bleed away the darkness. I mean,
That was another thing that frustrated me, is I'm like, why are the enemies faster than me in this game? Slash, I also get tired after running for like 10 seconds. I get
well,
Alan's apparently not in the best of shape, but like,
yeah, he's just an author. He sits at a desk all day. Plus, he appears to have a drinking problem.
I'm
Because
trying
I
to think of
mean,
another game where like the enemies, all of the enemies, let's clarify, all of the enemies are faster than me. Like,
mm,
there's not a lot.
yeah,
I could even see me being the same speed as the enemies. Like I could try to run and they'd keep continually pursuing me. But like the fact that I knew after like 10 seconds they were going to catch up to me, I was like, shit, I'm dead.
well, that's again, when you're running, you stop every once in a while and try to like turn back around, either drop a flare or try to trip them up with the flashlight.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Um, Crap, I just had something. What was I going to say? I lost it. Dang it. All
Oh,
right.
I will say the ones that threw stuff at you were a pain, because it's not like Resident Evil 4 where you can shoot the axes out of the air or
Mm,
anything, I don't think. So you basically had to dodge blindly as you were running from guys behind you that were throwing things you couldn't see, and hope that they didn't hit you. So I will
yeah,
say that was kind of a pain sometimes.
yeah, because there was no way to like strafe and magically not be hit. Like you were still just as likely to be hit.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you could use the dodge button, but you had to know when to do it. So if you just did it randomly, they'd catch up to you sooner, and it's yeah. But hmm. I do see where you're coming from with regards to the combat now, because yeah, when I played it, it would I don't want to say ease me into it, but it gave me a lot more of a chance to know what was coming, especially with like the birds and stuff. I mean, they would, you'd see it like from their perspective coming swooping down at you, and it's just like, oh crap, then you'd have to figure out like where they're coming from where you're standing, and yeah.
The birds, I feel like they did. Well, is that true or not? I was gonna say I don't think they ever switched the camera to the bird's point of view. I had to kind of like swing my flashlight around and try to figure out where they were at as
Hmm.
they were coming in.
Yeah, because I remember it being like they would all of a sudden the camera would would change and I'd see myself on the ground, and and it would slowly be pulling in towards me, like from where they were coming from, that I had to sort of like triangulate, that point versus where I am versus where I'm looking currently. So
It's interesting. I'm seeing people arguing about dodging working in general in this game. But I have a couple other associated points here
okay,
tangentially. They're not specifically combat, but just
sure, go for it.
one thing I really had trouble with in this game, and it only happened honestly like 10 times, which over a long game is maybe not that big of a deal, but I don't know why they would institute this system as game designers where you pick up ammo for an item, and whenever you pick up ammo, it automatically becomes your default weapon. Like I lost more flare gun shots and good ammo by picking it
Really?
up and then having a guy attack me, and then I try to shoot and it would be defaulted to whatever I got last, and I'd be like, well, there goes my flare. Like didn't mean to spend it
I
on that little guy, but
I had that happen when I picked up a new gun, but I don't think I had that happen when I just picked up ammo.
maybe it was like the first time I picked up a flare gun. That's possible, I guess.
Yeah, I
But
lost a few flares to that too. So that's fair.
it was kind of annoying though, I will say. Another beef I had with this is quiz question, Justin. Let's see if you know your behind the scenes stats here for playing this game. Which gun
Okay.
is better, the shotgun or the rifle?
I always go rifle,
No,
personally. Okay, why?
we don't know. They don't tell us. I don't know. I don't know which one's better. I don't know how much damage each does or what the pump action does versus the regular, besides hold a few more bullets, or the hunting rifle versus this other thing. I don't know which one I should take. No way to
Um,
know.
I I
What's
felt
better,
like
the heavy duty flashlight or the small lantern? I don't know.
okay, that one I agree. The small lantern had a wider beam, I think, but it didn't hold as much charge, so there was that trade-off. I usually went heavy duty flashlight between those two, but the heavy duty lantern was inarguably the best.
The best one.
Yeah. Which oddly enough, that saying that reminded me of one of the weird lines of dialogue from the Taken. You remember the one who was like talking about the rating the hot dogs at the hot dog stand? He's like, the gargantuan dog is the best dog, and the second best is the it's just it sometimes the dialogue gets really weird in this from the monsters.
Yeah,
Uh,
they had especially like the boss, the quote unquote mini boss monsters had like dialogue they would speak
mhm.
as they were
Yeah, even
coming
just like
to
the
you.
random ones, they'd have like like Deerfest is coming, and that sort of thing. It's just like weird random things that were more silly than anything sometimes.
Yeah.
I will
Um,
say,
Go ahead.
oh, in the base game, I was very disappointed we never fought the Deerfest float, because there were so many times it was like they're looming in the background, and it's just
Right.
like, oh, that's gonna be a boss. That gets rectified in one of the DLCs, and I was very happy about that.
Yeah. I thought that was gonna be a enemy at some point as well, but
Yeah.
um other little
Um,
tiny quibbles I had here just to finish off my quibble list. I kind of
hmm.
wish there was more variety with weapons rather than just those. Like I don't know what it would have been, because like a grenade launcher wouldn't have really made sense in the context of where they're at, but
The flashbangs even seemed like it was stretching things a bit.
yeah, for
Yeah.
the military outpost that was there. And then I understand they did it like to make it harder, but why did I have to continually keep losing all of my flashlights and weapons as I played through this?
I do feel like they did that a couple too many
It's like
times.
you woke up, guess what? You lost everything. Where did it go? Doesn't matter.
Sometimes it's like, oh, you tumbled off a cliff, so it kind of makes sense. But otherwise, it's just like, well, you're in a new area now. Better collect things again.
Tumbled off a cliff, not holding anything you just had in your hand.
uh, yeah, yeah. Um, I guess I will end this section with a positive. I will say, in terms of atmosphere, this really captured the feel of kind of a small, not quite Midwestern because this is on the West Coast, but just like a small rural community. Like there are times I felt like, oh, I could be walking down the town where I live, and I could see some of these folks. I mean, it felt very genuine at times, especially like in the diner. You see some of the oddballs that were in there. It felt very lived in, so to speak. So in terms of like presentation, when you do actually interact with other human characters, I thought, like you said earlier, yeah, it captured that really well. Um, so just wanted to end that on a positive note
I
because
have, I
I
have,
do.
I have a few other positives actually I'm going to throw
Oh,
out too,
sure.
if you're good at
Oh,
that.
Oh yeah.
I played mine on the Switch, and I actually thought the graphics were pretty good on this one. The cinema scenes in particular, I thought looked pretty crisp and clean, and the characters looked fairly realistic on the Switch version, which I can only assume on the other versions it will look even better on the remastered edition. So that was pretty good. I did enjoy the uh, well, I got a few other ones here. I liked how it doesn't make sense realistically again, but I did like that this is another game where like your energy regenerates as long as you don't take too much damage and die. Like if you have just that little sliver, you could run or try to pray to God that was the last enemy and that you're going to survive the section.
Mhm.
Realistically, I don't doesn't make any sense at all, but I do enjoy when games do that. Just it's kind of a fun way. I mean, it's not any better than a game where you're picking up healing items and eating an herb and
Mhm.
suddenly you feel better, I guess. But
Yeah, this health drink will certainly patch up this bullet wound.
exactly right.
Mhm.
I already mentioned, but I did like that the sections where you had the other characters with you, whether it was Barry or yeah, the sheriff, even later on here, or other people.
Mhm.
I liked that. Kind of made it fun. I did enjoy that they tried to do a game here with like a bit of a mystery with some horror element as well to it. I thought that was fun. And last one, I just want to give them praise for this one is because I don't think we talked about it really yet, is I really liked how they used the land in this game.
Mhm.
So there isn't a negative built into this positive, which is I wish there had been a map button, which
Uh,
there isn't. But when they first gave me some of those quests, and a lot of the times your objective in these chapters was like get to the mine or like get to the peak or whatever it was. And like you'd see this mountain peak like way the hell off in the distance. And I'd be like, well, they don't mean that peak. Like I'm clearly not going to go all the way to that thing. And you do eventually, some wacky roundabout path through a farm and some other place, you end up at that peak. So I did think it was really cool how what you saw is actually where you went to.
Mhm.
And it did feel like you had to go a long way from point A to point B. And in my head, and again, I don't have the map, but in my head, I'm like picturing how they laid this whole world out in such a linear way that you are making like this path through everything. And I think that was really well designed. I think there is a map on like the wall of like the police station or someplace, but
I
it
think
doesn't
so.
do the detail that I wish they had for the map. I think that'd have been really cool to see.
That's fair. Yeah, and I guess we should also mention there are driving sections in this. They function about as well as any random driving section in a Xbox 360 era game ever does. Wasn't a fan, but it did help you cover distance at least.
Yeah. Didn't need to
I
be there, but it did add like a little variety.
Yeah, I did kind of hate that. So there's collectibles you can find during the course of this, and it's everything from like thermoses to radio broadcasts to those Night Springs
Welcome to
episodes and
Night
whatnot.
Springs.
So and they're kind of like squirreled away and hidden out of the way places. Did you also find yourself just driving like 50 feet and then hopping out and just looking around the surrounding area to see if there was anything to find?
Well, that is a
I
great
hated
point
that.
on this scheme as well, because I did do that, but mostly to check for like ammo and batteries and stuff, more so than the collectibles. The collectibles, honestly, like I found the videos cool and the radios I turned on when I found those, but I really didn't go out of my way too much to look for the collectibles in this game. And I will say that is the downside of a lot of this being in outdoor environments is like you're in a 360 direction of where you could go look for something. And then I'm like, I don't know, like I tried to hug mountain edges when there was one or a cliff when there was one, but I was like, I'm not going to tromp through the woods, which it seems like it's going to let me walk quite a bit in this direction in hopes that I find one random thing over here.
Yeah, and there are a lot of sections of empty space, and sometimes the space doesn't stay empty, and enemies spawn, and it's like, well, that was a waste
Mm,
of my time and
yeah,
resources. So
absolutely.
yeah, I've always had kind of a love-hate relationship with collectibles and games, and I'm very mixed on how I feel about it here.
Oh, I have a question for you as well.
Sure.
I just saw this. I'm still trying to look up the answer to that other question here. I'm deep down in the Reddit boards at this point, but this somebody here just reminded me of one. There's like all of these points in the game where there is a loading screen because you die, and
Mhm.
it's basically like, if you get surrounded, try to run to the light, or it'll be like there are some sections where the taken are unlimited and they will just continue to spawn. Did you ever find a spot like that? I never did.
Um, there were
Maybe
sections
one.
where I remember I just gave up trying to shoot them and just ran because it seemed easier. I'm assuming those were probably some of them, but I know in the DLC there were certainly sections where they seemed unlimited.
Okay.
Um, but and there's probably a few sections in the base game too, which also makes it hard to find the collectibles because I'm sure they tucked a few of them away during those sections where you can't ever fight off everything. So,
Hmm.
um, but as is the case in a lot of horror games, sometimes the best option is just to run. So, uh,
I'm loving all these comments, by the way, on this one Reddit board of people arguing whether this game is hard or easy. And one person's like, Alan wouldn't win a race against a 10-yard foot race against an old age pensioner, bro.
I mean, yeah. I've always kind of hated that in games where it's like you can jog 20 feet and then all of a sudden you got your hands are on your knees and you're panting and whatnot.
These are
Um,
amazing comments, I gotta say. Shout out to Enraged Badger 9197 here on the podcast today, who said, I searched Alan Wake can't run for shit, and this post is the post that came up. I'm happy I'm not the only one who noticed the bastard runs like he never gets off the couch, but now that I read your answer, it does make sense. Fucker just writes books. How could he be sprinting through the forest all day? My God, this is amazing.
uh, every once in a while, Reddit actually does provide something of value.
It's hilarious. All right. I don't know.
Uh,
I'm still haven't found this. We may not find the answer, but that's all right.
okay. So did we want to do a rating of like the base game before we get into the DLCs, or do we want to kind of like do a recap at the end?
I think we should rate it now just to get that base down,
Okay.
see where we go, and then we'll talk about this wacky ass DLC that they put on here. Holy cow.
Okay.
You want me to go first? Or you gonna go first?
Sure. Yeah. You can go ahead.
All right, it sucked. 2 out of 10. Just kidding. Wasn't that
Okay,
bad.
good.
Um, this is a tough one because as I was thinking about how to rate this, I feel like everything we rate is always a tough call on rating this, which is good, I guess,
Yeah.
for what we're picking. But this was a really hard one because in my head right away, I was like, this game, as the experience I just had, exists somewhere between the fields of classic and crap.
Hmm.
And so the episode nature here is I got to go one direction or the other direction on this. For me, I really think they tried a lot of fun stuff with this one. It didn't all hit for me because, as I mentioned, like I, as a player personally, just felt like since anything could happen, that I could trust nothing that was taking place in this
Hmm.
game. The combat for me was extremely hard. I see people are mixed on this online as well, but there were parts where I'd play 5, 6 times trying to dash through the same field and was like, and I died again, and I died again,
Oh.
and I died again. Um, and some of that was me being not great at it, I guess, and I probably should have dodged a little more here and there, um, but it was still fun.
Okay.
I had some questions on the weapons and some things about how those mechanics worked and everything, but I will say one thing I didn't mention as a positive is I thought the game did actually almost everywhere a really good job of balancing the numbers of your ammo and batteries. There
Hmm.
was maybe like 3 spots I think in the base game where like I was down to like 2 bullets for one gun. Batteries never
Hmm.
seemed to be as big of a problem.
Yeah.
Probably because I played too conservatively with them, but the ammo, I was like, oh crap, I'm out of ammo. I gotta find something. And there were times too, I don't know if this was me and I didn't find it or what, but there were times where I'd get like 10 boxes of handgun ammo in a row before I found a handgun. And I
Huh.
was like, I have one shotgun bullet left. This is all I have, and I don't have another gun to shoot. I also
Um,
wasn't sure when you collected like rifle ammo, if you had the shotgun, it still let you collect it. And then
I
I
think
didn't know
so.
if you switched it, if like that was all there. I didn't really pay
Um,
attention enough to that, I guess.
I think you still have it on you even if you don't have the gun. I think
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but
That's
I
kind
think
of
I
what I
saw
was
it.
hoping because I thought maybe that was one of their impetuses to make you like switch the guns every once in a while to be like, oh, you've saved
Hmm.
up 50 of these, you should probably switch over.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's see, you're finishing up. I wish there was a little more variety with the enemies, definitely, and I wish you had found a few more things while you were out in the woods. Like, I wouldn't have minded seeing like a random hiker that was a real person out there who just got slaughtered by the Taken as they were rushing
Mm.
towards me, or like just some other players in this world besides just you and the Taken and the couple characters. I think would have made it a little more lively. I did enjoy some of the level variety. more so in the DLC, which I'll talk about here in a second. But so I'm going to give this a score of a final 6 out of 10 for me. And for me, the problem is again that comes right on the line of do I think this is a classic or do I think this is crap? And I have to say, with my experience with the combat, I have to go crap on this one. Sad as it makes me sound, but
Hmm.
that's where I'm at. 6 out of 10, El Crapola.
Uh, that one hurts a little.
That being
Uh,
said, I still enjoyed it.
oh, fair, fair. Um, Based on what I just said, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I fall on the opposite side of that line, but let me explain why. Yes, the some of the controls are a little janky at times, especially some of the platforming sections. There aren't many, but they exist, and some it's easy to miss a jump or to have him land, take a few steps, and then tumble off the edge. So there's that. There's the fact that the enemies aren't too terribly diverse, and some disappointing boss fights. So those are there. It does certainly have its negatives, but the world they're building and the story that is told through this, and the fact that there are so many questions throughout and even at the end, that's really strikes a chord with me. It feels well constructed. It feels very engaging. Like you mentioned, you never quite know what's real or what to expect, but at the same time, that kept me guessing. It kept me invested to see where this would go next. Like, if anything can happen, then it's a matter of there's always going to be a surprise, potentially in waiting in the wings, and I like that. Um, that said, this is a case where the story certainly elevates things more than the gameplay for me. Um, and I just really enjoyed my time with this, especially after I discovered there were DLCs I didn't even know about. But we'll get to that. But even as a base game, I I really am glad that I got to visit this one after so many years of not having an Xbox 360. 8 out of 10. This to me is a classic. It's not perfect by any means, but it's different, and it very much has its own identity out there. So it's certainly worth experiencing in my opinion.
Definitely better than Joe's album.
uh,
Got that going
Oh,
for
that
us.
is also something we should mention, like the music in this. Every chapter ends with like a musical outro, and I think by and large those were pretty effective. So it's that adds to the style of how this whole story was told throughout. So
Oh, hey, one question I have for you before I move to the DLC. Did the
sure.
manuscript pages that you collected mean anything?
They sometimes give you clues as to what was going to happen. Like I would occasionally find one where it would say Ellen entered the garage, and everything seemed quiet until until the back wall exploded, and this huge
Okay.
hulking giant with a chainsaw came through, that kind of thing.
Oh,
So
okay.
occasionally it would give you hints as to what to expect,
You
even
know,
though
this is another thing of game design retrospect. I didn't make the game and I didn't do all the tough stuff they had to do to make it, but there was one point towards the end of the base game where I had honestly hoped that the game was going to make you get all of the manuscript pages.
ooh,
And I knew I missed a lot from looking at the checklist. I didn't read them all, but I read a few. But I thought what was going to happen was there was a part towards the end where it seemed like I was really coming to the end, and there was like a manuscript page or two, and I was convinced it was going to put me in some kind of like loop until I collected enough pages and fought enough enemies that I had completed the book. And then I
oh.
was going to have to go do the end part. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool because if you were a very thorough searcher, this part's going to be easier for you now. But if you just blew through this, you're going to have to go through like the hell stage now to finish the book. I thought that would have been really cool.
Hmm. That is an interesting idea. And honestly, I'm a little surprised they didn't do something like that, because Remedy always kind of thinks outside the box with game mechanics like that.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that would have been a neat approach. I mean, I could see it really um, grinding the story to a halt for a bit, especially if you missed a lot of pages. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it would up the stakes significantly. So I like that idea, though. I do.
I knew you couldn't go back and obviously, re-explore all the stages that you had missed them in, but like if somehow
Mhm.
the game had dropped them like in this last infinite loop you were stuck in, like,
Yeah.
That might be kind of interesting. I don't know if we've seen many games where you have to collect collectibles. I don't know if that defeats the purpose of what they are then or
Hmm.
what, but I thought
Yeah,
it'd
because
be
then they
interesting.
essentially become key items, and that's a little
Yeah.
different. But hmm, it's a neat idea, though.
Hmm.
Definitely.
All right.
So, all right, we have
Let's
one classic,
let's
one
do
crap.
it.
All right. So, unbeknownst to me until earlier this week, the re-releases of this game, both the standard edition and the remastered edition, came with the bundled with the DLC that was originally like $6 or $7
Hmm.
when the game was released on the 360. Um, the game does not do a good job of telling you that this exists,
No.
because not at all. Because I beat the game and I figured, okay, if there's anything else, it would be on the main menu. There's a section that says extras. I'm like, if there's anything interesting and new and different there, it would probably be there. I looked it up and it's just like, like concept art galleries, the standard stuff. So I'm like, okay, I'm done. And I shelved it for a good long while. And then the idea of playing this and talking about it came up. And then you were like, so, all right, I'm done with the base game, onto the DLCs. And the plural caught my eye because I only knew of one DLC, which is honestly more of like a pseudo sequel. It's not very good. Alan Wake's American Nightmare, do not recommend. That is crap, not a classic by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay.
Um, but the others are the Signal and the Writer, which are about, what would you say, an hour and a half, 2 hours long
Yeah,
each, give or take.
that sounds about right.
Yeah. And they do actually, in that short span of time, they do a lot of legwork in fleshing out parts of the story and elements that were kind of glossed over before. Um, so I feel we should talk about those as well, because if you're going to buy this game today, you're going to get these included as well. To play them, you go to the episodes tab, and they're like way at the bottom. It's like special 1 and special 2. So if you're having trouble finding them like I did, that's where they are.
Yeah, I even
Um,
knew they were included, and I still had to Google how to access them.
yeah, which is not a great way to approach this sort of thing, but
Why you wouldn't
because I
have like
figured,
a pop-up on screen that's like DLC activated, blah blah blah. I don't know,
right,
something.
right, yeah, but so yeah, you do get a few extra hours for what you're paying for here. So the first one, as I said, is called The Signal, and that one, I honestly have stronger memories of the second one. The Signal starts. Does it have you in back in the town? Or I'm trying to remember, because I remember you start in a room and there's a TV. Does it start you back in the diner?
I
Is that
think you start in the diner, but it's like messed up, like it's different.
okay? Yes, yeah, that's sounding right. So yeah, like the sounds are distorted and things are kind of flickery and nothing feels right. The people there are still there, but they're like see-through kind of, and they're hard to hear. And so it's like you're starting off with that first section of the original game, except your wife's not with you. She's not out in the car. You can't really talk to the people very well. You can still interact with things, but it's all wrong. And you find your way to the bathroom in the back, where I think is where you find the keys initially, and then things get strange.
Yeah, they do.
Because Tom Zane starts talking to you through the mirror, and he hands you a few items that he says are not what they are. Like he hands you a gun. He's like, "This is not a gun. This is a tool for," very like NRA kind of double speak. This is a tool for change. um, and the flashlight. He says kind of something similar, and he's like, "You're still in the dark place. You need to follow the signal to get out." And then he breaks up, and at that point, you're just trying to find your way through the town and figure out what he's talking about, where you are,
Yeah.
and as you go, there's like these TV screens that are kind of popped up here and there, and they'll flash to images of you or another you that is like taunting you as you're going, and that other you plays a very major part in the sequel. I'll just say that. Um, but it's a very interesting mind trip going through all of this, because you're you're sort of taunting yourself with your failures and the fact that you're stuck there and how badly you've screwed everything up, and yet you're still pressing on, trying to escape. um it was a very it was the first game had a lot of psychological elements like the base game. This amped that up even
Yeah.
further, and I thought that was a really interesting approach. How about you?
Yeah, I thought it's kind of like remixing the original world. And I just thought that was really now for the first time I felt like in the game like I genuinely didn't know what to expect next because like it seemed like everything was being twisted and warped and like things I knew were going to be different. There might be new things added into this. And on top of that, like now this also made me as a player start to question the events in the first game a little bit more because now like here you see Barry, for example, who pops up and he's kind of like this ghostly Barry that like you can see through, but he is like coming along with you and interacting with you, talking to you. But through these DLCs, like Barry makes it very clear. He points out many times, like, you made me up. Like, I'm not here. I'm your version of me. And so then
Mhm.
that made me like actually question more of the stuff from the first game to be like, well, what was actually in Alan's head? What did he make up? Who was actually there? So this actually kind of, I think, twisted the psychology a little bit more from the first game and made me appreciate some of those things I said didn't fall as strong for me in the first game.
And I will say the DLCs, both of them, make greater use of a mechanic that shows up towards the end of the original game, where the whole writing motif becomes much more ingrained in the gameplay because there's words that will sort of appear in the world, and if you shine your flashlight on them long enough, they'll kind of pop. And whatever it might be like a light pole, and then a lamppost will appear, or but they're not all good. Some will say like ravens or enemy or whatever, and so you can't just like swing your flashlight around
Yeah.
wildly and hope for the best. You have to kind of pick and choose how to construct the world around you, and that was a really neat approach to offering up something different while staying thematically consistent with the original game.
Yeah, I
um
really agree. I was, as soon as I started playing that with all the words that you had to shine your light on, because at first all the words are good. It's like gun or like safe box or whatever. And then eventually like
Supplies.
there's all these negatives around you. You're like, oh crap, I got to be really careful with what I shine it on. I was kind of then picturing like what would the base game have been like if it had used that mechanic?
Oh,
Like would that have
I
made a fun game or would it have just gotten to be too much at that point then? I don't know.
I think it would have added some really interesting puzzles.
Hmm.
Like they could have worked that in a very satisfying and intriguing way. Like maybe even during boss fights, if you had to. Well, there's a few instances during these where you're being swarmed by Taken, and it'll say like drop or fall or something like that. And if you shine it at that, like something will collapse and take some of them with it. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it could have really opened up some brilliant possibilities. And I don't know if they didn't think of this concept until like towards the end of development for the original game, or if it would have just been too costly to implement throughout the entirety of it, or what. But a really neat idea, and I'm glad that they toyed with it more in both of these DLCs.
Yeah, for sure. Can I ask, does this make an appearance in part two or not?
Um, Not as such.
Okay.
There are parts where you can use words, but it's not like they're out in the world. It's like you'll find story elements, and just as like a basic example, it'll be like crime scene or party or something like that, and you can be in an area where you can slot one of these words in, and it will change the surroundings around you in a much more dramatic sort of way. So you can be like in the lobby of a hotel or whatever, and you slot in crime scene, and all of a sudden there's this like kind of staticky overlay, and there's the sound of a typewriter going, and all of a sudden there's blood all around you, and
Hmm.
like dead bodies and things.
Oh,
um
okay.
so that's the extent that it gets worked in the sequel. It's not quite the same, but similar.
Okay.
uh, yeah.
Well, it still sounds cool.
Yeah, the sequel is a great game, I will say that right off the bat. Very different, but still very good. But yeah, the first DLC was an interesting breath of fresh air, because it did do a lot of things differently. Um, and like I think I mentioned a bit earlier, I do have stronger feelings and memories about the second one, but I still enjoyed this one. So if you remember the events of the first one better than I do, feel free to fill things in, because I don't remember exactly where this one left off.
Um, I can't say I remember the split well, but I can see I got like a summary up on the screen here. Basically, you're headed to the sawmill in the first one, where you have the
Okay.
final boss fight in the basement of the sawmill with, you guessed it, more TVs. Um,
TVs that are like screaming, insults and just uh derogatory comments at you, trying to tear down your psyche as yourself as you're fighting them. It's interesting.
Yeah. Um, Basically it says here, this is Zane who had helped him basically through the whole first case. Like Alan kind of gets angry at him for like telling him that this is all his doing and he's creating all this and to stop going further into the darkness or whatever they call it, the dark place. And eventually this one ends with him on the floor in the cabin surrounded by pages is where this one ends at,
Oh, okay.
which I think is his moment of clarity. Like I control like the ability to get out of here, but I mean plot wise I don't know that this DLC changes anything, to be quite honest. It's just him realizing like I need to get out of this place some way,
Okay.
shape, or form.
Yeah,
What
that's
did
fair. It's a different perspective, but yeah, I don't think it affects the end point of the prior story.
what did you think of the demolition derby in this scene?
Um, that one, once because like I said, I played these a significant time after I played the original game. Once I realized the trick to fighting any inanimate object in this, it was pretty easy because anytime you're fighting like a cable spool or like a car that's being lifted up and is like flying through the air towards you, just stand behind a piece of permanent geometry, like a lamppost or a pillar on a building. It'll just ping off, and you're safe. And you can just like keep shining your flashlight on it until it goes away. I kind of
Yeah.
did the same thing with the cars. Cool thematically, but then it's like, oh wait, I can cheese my way through this, and yeah.
I will say, even doing that though, like at least they were smart enough that there were certain items like that that they had programmed to like bounce over the top of whatever I was actually hiding behind, and I was like, oh shit, this thing's still trying to get back here.
True. So you had to kind of pick and choose where you hid, but yeah, it really did take a lot of the tension out of like well, the crane was different because that was like actually moving around the environment and like swinging at you. But like, dumpsters being thrown at you, it's like, well, I can just hide behind this thing that should snap in half as if it gets hit by a dumpster, and instead I'm perfectly safe.
Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, it was a neat set piece, even though it was easy to cheese your way through it.
All right. What'd you give DLC one? You got a number on that one?
Um, I enjoyed it. I mean, it definitely added some new and interesting elements. It was short, which means it didn't overstay its welcome. But at the same time, it did leave me wanting more, which is good because the second one was right around the corner. Um, I enjoyed it, but not as much as the base game, I think. So I'm gonna give that one a 7 out of 10. Still very much worth playing. Interesting concepts, but not as noteworthy as the base game.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually also going to give this a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed the kind of fresh air this one had as like a totally different style of game within that same universe. Like I said, for me, it actually kind of ratcheted up the events of the first game as far as like what is in his mind and what is not in his mind. And I liked the mechanic of like shining the light on words. I think that would be a really interesting game if they made something like that or somebody else made something like that. Almost like it wouldn't have to be, I mean, it wouldn't even have to be a scary game. I think there are games that have like sections that are all words around you, but like the idea of like you mostly controlling which ones you flash into existence to
Mhm.
craft the world around you is kind of a really interesting concept.
Is I want to say there's a few indie games that have taken that basic idea and run with it.
Okay.
I'm blanking like Baba Is You, I think is one of them where you can really mess with how the world is by typing different things, but I haven't played that one, so I don't know for sure. But I think there are a few out there that have kind of toyed with that idea. Might have to check them out after talking about this because yeah, you're right. It is a really neat mechanic.
All right.
So that brings us to the second uh, base DLC, The Writer, which picks up, I think, right where the last one left off, I want to say.
See, this is when he wakes up and he's at the hospital again.
Oh, okay, right.
The
So yeah,
doctor's trying to
it's
give him medicine, and then he is like, "Rah!"
mhm. So yeah, this one it incorporated a lot of the elements of the first DLC. So like the words, the constructing the world around you. Um but it did some absolutely brilliant things with the level design. Like, it truly felt at times like you were in a phantasmagorical dream world where anything could happen, and up is down, left is right, sometimes literally. Like, you could enter a room and all of a sudden the entire building would start rotating around you, and you'd have to dodge furniture that's not anchored to the floor anymore, and it's like flying towards you, and try to figure out a way out without getting crushed. Or there's like one section where you're essentially like running along the inside of a giant drum. It's kind of what it felt like,
Oh
as
yeah, that
things
was
rotate
weird.
around you, and you're, yeah, just absolutely brilliant level design in this. There are some bits of platforming which, again, it's still clunky. When you're trying to like land on a ledge that's maybe 2 or 3 feet wide, and you just skip a little bit off, or you hit a piece of geometry you're not supposed to, and all of a sudden you're tumbling into the abyss. That left a little bit to be desired, but the ambition there was just fantastic. Um, because yeah, in this one, yeah, it's again, like I said, a lot of the same with the words and such, but they amped everything else up to 11, and I really liked the approach they took here. Um, Tom Zane isn't as much of a factor here. He's sort of like faded into the background, or he can't reach you anymore. So
Yeah.
you're pretty much on your own. With Ghostberry was in this too, wasn't
Yep.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah. He's who you fight. Yeah. At the end. Again, we've been doing spoilers for a while, but
Uh-huh.
yeah. And the idea that Barry, this version of Barry that you've conjured up out of your head, he realizes he only exists in your head, and that if you escape this illusion, this hallucination, he's going to disappear, and he's angry about that. That is just fascinating too, because it shows that even when he's not in full possession of his faculties, Alan himself is still creating things, and they're still affecting the world, even to some capacity, which really is um, it's kind of striking in terms of carrying on the thematics of this whole series, where he's the things he's writing, the things he's thinking up, are becoming real, and it's just a great addition to the overall mythos.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had just forgotten about the giant wheel part you were talking about. That was so cool though. Like
Yeah, because it's like,
so cool.
it's like I see this doorway or this opening off in the distance, but it's like rotated up 80 degrees above me. I have to wait until it gets to a point where I can jump to it or fall through it, and then who knows what's on the other side.
Yeah,
And
you'd make it through a door and then finally be like, all right, I made it through, and then you'd fall like 10 stories to the bottom of the room. And you're like, oh, I wasn't supposed to do that.
yep.
But that was a brutal trial and error, but it was a really fun trial and error. And then the other part I think I vaguely mentioned to you on the chat, but I never got in detail was the sequence where you were running up to the lighthouse towards the almost end part with like trying to shine
Mm.
the flashlight to make the boulders disappear. So the super powerful lighthouse light that's rotating around is
Mhm.
just like zapping and slashing all the
Oh,
take in as long as you have the boulders down or standing someplace where the light can get to them. I thought that sequence was just awesome.
yep. And that was definitely one of the they are endless kind of sequences where
Yeah,
you
good
can't
point.
fight them off. Yeah. Yeah, that was great, and it worked in all of the mechanics up until that point. It just perfectly, I think.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, so this is really Remedy at their best. The studio that developed these games. I mean, when they actually have free reign to just let their creativity flow, they come up with some truly special things. Um, did we want to jump directly into a rating off of that, or anything else you wanted to say about this one?
No, I just say the final quote unquote fight in this one is like having to take out the Anderson brothers, the old gods, and then
Hmm.
also the doctor, and then you have to beat Barry several times, I think, at the end.
Yep. While
And
birds
this,
are flying at you and
oh
trying
yeah,
to
that's right
distract
too.
you, and yeah, oh.
Yeah, and that was actually fun too because I don't think really prior to that we had had many instances of the birds attacking while you were fighting enemies, and that like changed combat immensely to be like, oh, I
Yep.
can't just focus on this or this now,
Yep, because
which
they got to
is
drive them away, and
yeah,
yeah,
you think they would have used that earlier at some point too, because that even that just changed the combat mechanics
yeah,
more. But basically this one ends with him, long story short, getting back to the cabin
Mhm.
and finding basically himself on the floor, the insane version of himself on the floor, which I was convinced the game was going to, I don't know why, I guess the typewriter makes more sense, but I was convinced with all of this effort to get to the lighthouse, that
Mhm.
was going to be where the game ended. And I actually kind of loved that he got to like the top of the lighthouse and like opened a door and like climbed out into the world. And I was like, oh shit,
Yeah.
that was cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I just love you mentioned earlier the whole aspect of never quite knowing what to expect, and that it's done in the best way possible in this DLC. It's a short experience, but holy crap, is it a good one.
Yeah, I totally agree. At the end of this, I was curious. So at the end, he's basically sitting at the typewriter and he's going to start a new piece that he's going to write himself, seemingly out of the dark place back into the real world. But
Mhm.
my question was like, isn't that essentially what Thomas Zane tried to do, like to have it all?
Yep.
So we don't know where that's going to go, I guess, right?
Yep. Unless you play the sequel.
Unless he played the sequel and found out it was all a dream and you just been fucking with me for an hour and a half. That's all right, though.
No, the sequel actually does raise more questions by the end, but it's a very interesting experience.
Okay.
Um, and it also blends. It's interesting because this isn't too much of a spoiler because I think there were articles fairly prominently about it. Alan Wake 2 is the first step towards creating a shared universe between Remedy's games.
Oh,
So
wow.
it like bleeds over with Control, which is also a pretty good game, because the elements from that factor in pretty heavily into the events of Alan Wake 2.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's interesting that what they're trying to build here.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah. So I guess we should slap a rating on
Yeah,
DLC
let's do
2.
it.
Sure. This one, I honestly wish the whole game had been like this. Not to say I didn't enjoy the base game because I did, like I said, but holy crap, it could have been this for the entirety of the run. Um, so yeah, this is not quite perfect. Like I said, a little bit of uh, you know awkwardness with the controls here and there with the platforming, but honestly, I loved this. This was a 9 out of 10 easily for me. So I just wish the entire game had been up to this level. But even without that, still very much worth playing.
Yeah, totally echoed here. This was the standout of the whole experience to me as well. I'm super glad I played the DLCs because I know some of the past podcasts we've done, like there's the question of do we include these, do we not? And we've had some hit or miss ones here.
Mhm.
Cough, Golden Idol, cough, Golden Idol. But this one was awesome. Like I'm so happy I played this one. Even just the lighthouse sequence and the rotating room that you mentioned, like those two alone, I was like, this is awesome.
Mhm.
So I actually bumped it up while we were talking about it. I had it at 1 and we take it up. So I'm going to give a final of 8.5 on this. I had it at 8, but I do think it's better than that.
Yes.
So, like you said, if they had taken a lot of these ideas and just incorporated this more into the game, like,
Mhm.
because it is kind of interesting. Like, it does feel like the base game they were trying to make like Twin Peaks the video game.
Mhm.
And then by the DLC, they were like, let's just go crazy with this and like totally go tripping on anything we can come up with for ideas. And like it worked surprisingly here. I mean,
Yeah.
it was fun. Everything felt surreal, like a dream sequence, and like you really didn't know what was going to be next. And
Yeah.
it was cool. And you got to fight the giant deer. So we didn't mention that, but
Oh yes, yeah. You finally get to fight the Deerfest float, which
yay.
I that made me so happy when all of a sudden this thing starts shaking. I'm like, oh, it's happening.
Awesome.
Ah, yeah. So, there you have it. I would say, I mean, the base game sounds like we are a little bit mixed, but did seem like we both enjoyed our time with it to some extent. The DLC is certainly worth playing. If you're interested in checking out Alan Wake, as I said, I consider it a classic, and just doing a quick price check here. Yeah, it's like $15 on Steam. It's yeah, it's cheaper than, well, it's like a third no, not even a third. It's like a fourth the price of like a new AAA game, and it is certainly different than a lot of what you'll see out there today. Much more distinctive, and just a very different, interesting take on a survival horror kind of approach. As long as you don't mind the lack of enemy variety and the kind of staleness that the combat can get as a result of that, it's worth every penny, I would say. So, and any closing thoughts on your end, Cody?
No, I would just say, like I said earlier, I did enjoy the experience. There were some problems for me, specifically with combat, that's going to make this one slightly into the crap range, but I enjoyed my time with it. And if you do get any of the modern iterations, definitely check out the DLCs because I don't know if I would say they alone made the experience for me, but they definitely added a ton to the experience for me. So,
Okay. All right, so I guess that leaves us with our outro, and not sure if this is like a 20-second rant worthy thing, but since you're kind of the one of the big music guys of our podcast, so let's say you find yourself on the stage in the middle of a cornfield, being besieged by monsters of some sort that are bum rushing the stage trying to kill you, and you're fighting with the controls trying to figure out how to fight back and drive them away. What song is playing in the background?
ooh, wow, what a great question. It would have to be, well, my first instinct would have to be something that's like super fast and hard, but also it would be funny if there was like some Beethoven or some shit playing in the background. That'd be totally different. But no, it'd probably be something super hard, like I don't know, Metallica was the first thing that jumped into mind, but I could do like some Metallica or even like some Slipknot or something like super hard to just have like a head thumping experience as they're rushing the stage here. So definitely something hard. I'll say Slipknot, Wait and Bleed.
Oh, all right, solid
Yeah.
choice. But what if
Oh no.
you're fiddling with the controls and what comes out is Americana?
Oh Jesus. Well, first I would put my hand up in a stop motion to all the Taken that made it onto the stage and ask them exactly what constitutes Americana because no one can seemingly tell me this. Um, I imagine they probably would also be stopped themselves having conversations on whether it was country or Americana music that was playing at that time. But either way, I would expect Barry to be playing something on the keyboards that could definitely make fireworks rain in the style of the American flag. That's Americana music. And if it doesn't do that, then it's not Americana.
All right, there you have it, folks. The age-old question finally answered. Um, all right, well, I think that about wraps us up. So until next time, this has been Justin
And Cody,
for another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Have a
there we
good night,
go.
everyone.
Hey, don't forget, Steamboat Willie is in public domain. You can do all kinds of things with him. Bye.
And how?